For 19 years, my husband told people I didn't work at dinner parties, to his business partners, and once, right to my face, in front of our daughter. What almost nobody knew was that I had built the company sitting under his name from the scratch. Every dollar of funding that kept it alive during the years it should have died was my doing. He found out the truth the same day he served me divorce papers. He thought he was taking everything from me. He didn't know he was about to lose everything to me. This is the story of how I let a man believe he built an empire, and what happened the day I stopped letting him believe it. My name is Patricia. I met David when I was 24. He was charming, ambitious, attentive, and the smartest person in the room, or at least the one working hardest to seem like it. He had an idea, a logistics startup, freight brokering, a system to connect small manufacturers with truckers who had empty space and dead miles. I felt that was a good idea. What made it work wasn't the idea. It was the 18-hour days I spent building the infrastructure behind it while he was out doing what he called relationship building, lunches, golf, vague promises to men who liked being flattered. I've always been good with systems, spreadsheets, contracts, the unglamorous plumbing that keeps a business going. I built our first client database by hand and wrote the first 50 contracts myself, teaching myself contract law from library books after David went to sleep. I kept the books, chased the invoices, and fired our first bad hire because David couldn't bring himself to do it. When our first investor pulled out 3 weeks before payroll, I found the second round of funding staying up until 4 in the morning on a pitch deck David presented the next day and took full credit for because that was our arrangement. Publicly, he was the founder. Privately, I owned 49% of the company through a holding entity my father's old attorney helped me set up, quietly, that most people, eventually including David, forgot it existed. I didn't do this because I was weak or didn't know my own worth. At 26, with our whole lives bet on this business, I genuinely believed a united front mattered more than my own recognition, that love meant not needing credit. I was right that the company would win. I was wrong about the we. By our 10th anniversary, David Wayne was known in 3 states. Meridian Freight Solutions had 400 employees. Regional business magazines profiled him, a photo at his glass desk, arms crossed, calling him a self-made logistics visionary. I wasn't in any of those photos. I wasn't in the room when they were taken. At home, I was Patricia, David's wife. At the company Christmas party, I was the woman who organized the seating chart. When new hires asked what I did, David had a line he used so often it stopped sounding like a joke. Patricia keeps the house running so I can keep the company running. For years I told myself it didn't matter, the money was real. Our daughter Mia had a good life, and titles were vanity. I still ran finance and contracts quietly from a home office under a consulting arrangement that paid a fraction of what the work was worth. David had structured it that way after saying, offhandedly, that it looked bad for a founder's wife to be listed as an executive. Investors like a simple story, he said. One face. One vision. I let him have the face. I kept the 49%. Around the 12th year, David started drinking more. Started disappearing for conferences that didn't show up on any calendar I could find. Started coming home smelling like a perfume that wasn't the one I bought him for his birthday. I didn't confront him right away, not out of weakness. I was calculating what a confrontation would cost, emotionally and financially, for Mia, who was 15 and had just started to feel steady in her own life. IT was on a Tuesday in March, when I found the second phone, not hidden cleverly, in the glove box of the car he'd let me use while mine was in the shop, forgotten there after he switched vehicles in a rush. The lock screen showed a woman I didn't recognize, Brooke, a marketing associate who'd joined Meridian 18 months earlier and whose name had come up in conversation more than it should have. I sat there for 11 minutes calculating what I actually owned, what I could prove I owned, what was still in my name after 15 years of paperwork nobody had bothered to read closely, because nobody thought the quiet wife in the home office was worth reading closely. 3 weeks later, David sat me down at our kitchen table, the same table where I'd once built our first pricing model on a laptop with a cracked screen, and told me he wanted a divorce. The marriage had run its course, he said. He'd met someone who understood the pressure of building something. Then, I know this is hard, Patricia, but you'll be taken care of. You don't have anything tied up in the company anyway. It was always mine. It was always mine. 19 years, and he genuinely believed that.
I didn't argue that night.
I let him think the conversation had gone exactly as planned, probably rehearsed in some hotel bathroom mirror. I asked for 2 weeks before we told Mia. He agreed, relieved, mistaking my calm for defeat. I spent those 2 weeks on the phone with an attorney named Mandy, who'd drawn up my original holding company paperwork 19 years earlier and had watched, from a professional distance, exactly how careful I'd been ever since. "You know what you have, right?" she asked on. "I know what I have," I said. "I don't think he does." Here's what 19 years of quiet paperwork had actually built. Meridian Freight Solutions was legally a majority-owned subsidiary of a parent holding company called Harborline Capital, formed in our 4th year of marriage after a lawsuit from a disgruntled early investor made David nervous about liability. He'd asked me to handle the boring legal stuff so he could focus on the vision. I structured Harborline with 49% in my name and 1% held by Mandy's firm as a neutral tiebreaker, a detail David signed off on in a stack of documents he never fully read because reading contracts was, in his words, not where I add value. 49 plus 1 is 50. David held 49% personally. The remaining 1% defaulted to my control in the event of a divorce filing by either party, while both remained officers of Harborline. He'd signed this 15 years ago, framed at the time as protection for the family, just in case. There was more. The client relationships generating 80% of Meridian's revenue, including the 2 largest accounts, worth $11 million a year combined, ran through me. Not through David's golf course lunches, but through 15 years of answering 3 a.m. emails when a shipment went missing in Ohio, remembering a client's daughter's wedding date, negotiating renewal terms year after year while David gave the toast at the annual gala. Most of those contracts included a key person continuity clause naming me, under my formal title as Director of Client Operations, as a required signatory for renewal standard in logistics work, where trust matters more than almost anything. Our largest client, a stubborn third-generation manufacturer named Walt Kowalski, had insisted on it years earlier after a bad experience with a competitor who lost his account manager, and with her, all institutional memory of his business. David didn't remember the clause existed. I remembered every word of it. And then there was Brooke, not just David's affair, but also, on paper, the newly appointed VP of Strategic Growth. A title David had created for her 4 months earlier, with a compensation package that required board approval he'd never obtained, because he'd assumed correctly for 18 years, incorrectly starting that Tuesday in March, that I would simply sign whatever he put in front of me. I hadn't signed it. David filed the divorce papers on a Thursday, served to me himself at home with performative solemnity, as if he expected me to fall apart before he drove off in the car he'd leased with Harborline funds. I signed them. I thanked him. I asked whether he still intended to attend Meridian's 15th anniversary gala the following Saturday. He blinked. Of course. It's the biggest event of the year. Good, I said. I'll see you there. 400 guests. Investors, clients, employees, a representative from the mayor's office, a string quartet David had insisted on. A 12-foot banner behind the stage with his face on it. 15 years of vision. He gave his usual speech, the one about starting with nothing but an idea and a dream, a version of our origin story that had erased me from it entirely, the way water erases a name written in sand. He thanked the team. He thanked Brooke by name as the future of this company's growth, and I watched several people in the crowd exchange glances. Then he thanked his family for their support, gestured vaguely toward the table where I sat with Mia, and moved on to the champagne toast. I let him finish. I let the applause die down. Then, as the room's attention began to drift back toward dessert, I walked to the stage. I hadn't asked for the microphone in advance. My name is Patricia Wayne, Director of Client Operations, and, as of that morning, Managing Partner of Harborline Capital was already on the program, 3 lines beneath his, in the smallest font on the page, exactly where he'd always insisted it belonged. I want to thank everyone for 15 incredible years, I said. And I want to make sure a few of you have accurate information, since some of tonight's decisions are going to affect your contracts starting Monday. The room went quiet. They sensed something has gone off script. I told them that Harborline Capital, the entity that actually owned Meridian, had undergone a change in operational control that morning, following divorce proceedings between its two largest shareholders. I told them client continuity would be maintained by the existing client operations team, which I'd led for 15 years. I thanked Walt Kowalski by name for the foresight of a clause he'd requested years earlier, one that now protected his account regardless of who held the microphone. I didn't mention Brooke. I didn't need to. Half the room already knew, and the other half figured it out from the color David's face had turned. I stepped down to a silence, so complete I could hear the string quartet's cellist quietly setting down her bow. According to Mandy, it was one of the cleanest ownerships transitions she'd overseen in 23 years of corporate law, mostly because there was almost nothing left to fight over. David had signed away the tiebreaker vote 15 years earlier, without reading it. He'd built Brooke's promotion on authority he didn't legally have. And he'd spent 19 years assuming the woman who didn't work had nothing worth taking. He hired an attorney, good, expensive, aggressive, who spent 3 weeks looking for a way around the Harborline structure and found exactly what Mandy already knew he'd find. Nothing. The one thing David had never done, in 19 years as the face of the company, was read the paperwork closely enough to know what he'd given away in the name of handling the boring stuff. 2 of Meridian's 3 largest clients formally requested that future business route exclusively through me, invoking the key person clauses David had forgotten existed. Walt Kowalski, asked by a local reporter who'd caught wind of the gala speech, said simply, "I've been doing business with Patricia Wayne for 11 years. I didn't know her husband's name was on the building until somebody told me." That quote ran in 3 regional papers. Brooke's promotion was formally voided within a week, on procedural grounds. She resigned 2 weeks later, before she could be pushed. I heard, secondhand, that she and David weren't together anymore, though I didn't ask and didn't much care. That part was never really about her. David remained on Meridian's board, technically, with his 49% intact. On paper, he's still wealthy, still a founder, still a self-made logistics visionary, in 3 regional magazines that haven't updated their archives. But operational control, the actual running of the company, the client relationships, the strategic decisions moved to me. Quietly, the way almost everything I've ever built has moved. Not with the courtroom drama. With paperwork he never bothered to read, filed 15 years in advance, by a woman he'd once told a room full of employees didn't work. I want to end this differently than most stories like mine end, because the neat, triumphant version villain grovels, ex-wife drives off in a red convertible, isn't quite honest. I didn't feel triumphant at that gala. I felt tired. 19 years of being underestimated doesn't resolve itself in one good speech, no matter how well the applause line lands. I went home, took off the dress I'd worn specifically because it had pockets deep enough to hold a folded copy of the trust agreement I never actually needed to pull out, and sat on my kitchen floor and cried for the first time in months. Not because I'd lost David, because I mourned, briefly, the 19-year-old version of myself who believed staying quiet was the same thing as being strong. Years later, Mia, 22 now and finishing her MBA, once asked why I didn't leave years earlier, once I already had enough leverage to walk away comfortably. It's a fair question. I think about it often. The real answer is that I didn't build Harborline structure as a weapon. I built it as insurance, the way you buy insurance for a house fire you hope never happens. I didn't want revenge. I wanted protection. The revenge, if that's even the right word, only happened because David handed me a reason to use what I'd already built, and because I finally, at 43, ran out of patience for being called the wife who doesn't work by a man standing on a stage I had financed for 15 years. Today, Meridian Freight Solutions is still one of the largest independent freight brokers in the region. It just runs under new leadership. Mine. Walt Kowalski still calls me on his daughter's birthday, mostly to talk business, sometimes just to check in. David still gets invited to industry events, out of habit, as the founder. He usually declines now. And I've started telling people the truth that I run a logistics company. I built it, mostly, from a home office, while somebody else took the photographs. If you take one thing from this story, let it be this: being underestimated isn't the same as being powerless. Sometimes it's cover. And sometimes the quietest person in the room is the only one who actually knows what's holding the building up. If this story hit home for you, if you've ever been the quiet one who did the work while someone else took the bow, let me know in the comments. I read every one. And if you want more stories like this, hit subscribe. The next one's even wilder.